Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar this morning. It's part of a series of webinars looking at themes around suicide prevention. So today's theme is autism, but we've also looked at relationship breakup, poverty, substance misuse. Then next month we're looking at domestic abuse. So yes, this is part of a series because obviously suicide prevention is a very sensitive topic. So I would encourage you to look after yourself. If you need to have some space or to speak to a close friend, just encourage you to look after yourself both during the webinar and obviously afterwards as well. In Suffolk, every year we have around 70 deaths that are recorded by the coroner as suicide, and this is in line with the national average. But obviously, every one death is a death too many. So making suicide prevention everyone's business is important because it is the interactions that you and I have that as we go about our personal and our work lives that will make the difference. So today we're going to move my slide on. Actually, before I just talk about the speakers today, we just want to highlight there's some new national guidelines out from the NHS England that cover I guess move away from risk assessment to safety planning. So just want to make you aware of that. So if you were to Google staying safe from suicide, NHS England, that would take you to that. That's aimed at mental health professionals, but I would encourage you to have a read if it's of interest to you. And we'll probably do a webinar on that, on safety planning, coming up in the future. So our theme this morning is autism. So we've got Sue Wilgoss from NSFT. She's also got various other hats, and she'll introduce herself in more detail. And we've got Dr. Beth Mosley and Dr. Rob Peers, both from NSFT. And also we're going to finish with Ashley Wilson, who's from an organisation called SJOG, which is based in Darlington, and they're going to talk about some autism website resources. So without any more ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Sue. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. And I'm just going to try and share my slide, which worked very, very well previously, and now play me up. Is it there, Graham? Can you tell me?
Yes, not in presenter mode, but it is there.
Okay, we're there.
Not quite, but sometimes there's lag.
Clicking it again.
Still not in presenter. There we go.
There we go. Thank you. That's about 4 clicks it took to do that one. Okay, so as Graham said, my name's Sue Wilgoss. I am going to be talking about the loss of my son, so please do take care of yourself. And I don't want to upset anybody, but just be careful. So I am an advisor for suicide prevention with lived experience for Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. But I also have a number of other roles because my life took a turn when we lost Daniel and took me on a route that I never thought that I would do, but I'm so glad to be here speaking to you today and sharing my story and Daniel's. Founder of Live Loud for Danny, that's the organisation I set up. Following our loss, we provide support for those with mental health difficulties and their carers, and we also provide support for families with children with special educational needs who may be going through the special needs system. I also a lived experience influencer for the National Suicide Prevention Alliance and various other things there that I do. But everything I do with Daniel in my heart and mind because he is my driving force. And that's a picture of him there in his gym, having a word with Doug, one of his friends there. So why am I here? Daniel died on the 17th of June in 2018. It was Father's Day. He was autistic, just 25 years old. A champion powerlifter. He'd represented England. He'd been a European champion. He'd made so many achievements, a gym owner, and he was really going places. He had records that he set in his powerlifting nationally that stood in place for several years after we lost him. But the night he died, I sat with him and I held his hand and I promised him that something positive must come from our loss and that things must change. I'd already been involved in some suicide prevention work with the NSFT as a carer of somebody who had made multiple attempts. Daniel had been under mental health services since he was 3.5 years old and diagnosed as autistic just before his 9th birthday. I forgot to add at the beginning that I am also autistic, late diagnosed, but nevertheless. His really only difficulties that he had as a child was anxiety and school refusal. And he didn't attend full-time school from year 3 and no school at all from year 6. But his biggest struggles came after a head injury in April 2010. And his first suicide attempt came in December that year. And those attempts on his life continued, very serious intentional attempts. He died waiting for a call back from mental health services. And he eventually did. I'd managed to get him an appointment for someone to come and see him. I'd been pleading for several weeks, months, that he needed more help. And at that last appointment, despite saying that he was closer to the edge than ever before, the only thing that was offered was a phone app and no hope. And I know there was no hope from reading his notes afterwards. The team had written in his notes the day before he saw them that I was getting increasingly angry with them, and they were going to come and see him, but they didn't know why, because they had nothing to offer. And you can always offer hope. But Daniel also had an education, health and care plan at the time of his death, and it had absolutely none of the provision from education, nothing from social care, and what he had from health did not meet his needs. There was a constant backwards and forwards between social care saying that it was mental health's job and mental health saying this is a social care job for the support that he needed. And I always speak about this, that education, health and care and all commission boards must have regard to the SEND Code of Practice 0 to 25. A lot of people think it's just educational, but it is absolutely not. So everybody had their part to play to ensure that Daniel achieved the best possible education and other outcomes. At his inquest at the end of 2021, the coroner gave a narrative verdict and spoke of the missed opportunities. The biggest missed opportunity he spoke about was his annual review that didn't take place, and it should have done at least 7 months before he died. And he said that would have been maybe the last opportunity that everybody that worked with Daniel could have sat around the table and made a difference. But it did include every service that I've listed here: NSFT, education, social care, safeguarding, and the police. Safeguarding referrals were put through multiple times, and not one of them we ever heard about anything from. Police did those. Daniel spent far too many nights in a police cell rather than a place of safety, and was criminalised for his mental health. Suicide prevention. This has been my mantra always. Suicide prevention is everybody's business, and we must all work together. It is now part of the national strategy and obviously the name of these webinars. But the barriers that we met for Daniel to get the right support, I was frequently told, and I know some parents are still told this now, or adults, it's part of his autism and not his mental health. It's because he's autistic that we can't do this or that. It's not in his best interest because he's autistic to admit him, but he may not have been a positive experience for him, but he may have still been here. A lack of reasonable adjustments, little understanding or awareness of the presentations of an autistic person in crisis or at appointments. There was little or no listening to family and friends, those that knew him best. A lack of curiosity, asking those questions at appointments. Daniel would often, they would be asked, are you suicidal? He never used the term suicidal. He would say, I want to go to sleep and not wake up. But no, he'd be focused on, are you suicidal now? And he would say no, because at that time, actually being at an appointment and being somewhere he didn't want to be would be all that was in his mind. It's about asking further, how have you been? How do you think you will be? and a lack of adaptations to therapy, and actually no therapy offered at all in recent years, the last few years of his life. No crisis team support because they couldn't provide consistent support. I have to say, my husband went into crisis shortly after losing Daniel, and I did end up with the crisis team in our house after my husband had been taken to hospital very unwell. And my husband is autistic, and we had two people from the crisis team in our home. And my husband just kept saying, "Why weren't you here for my boy?" Because he found it so hard to accept that they'd refused to come and see him, but they came here to see my husband, and he hadn't made an attempt on his life. But the Trust identified much of the above in the serious incident report and concluded that Daniel's death was more likely than not to have resulted from problems in care delivery and service provision. And shortly after our loss, I met with the Trust, and they asked me if I worked with them to help them learn from Daniel's experiences and his death. And I was employed by the Trust in 2020, and I'm still here continuing my drive for change, locally, regionally, and nationally, so others do not go through what we did. So, autism and suicide risk, the statistics are horrific, and you can see there that autistic adults with no learning disability are 9 times more likely to die by suicide. For autistic females, it's 13 times. It's the second leading cause of death in autistic people. It's actually, I think, the top lead cause of death now. This data comes from Autistica. And autistic children are 28 times more likely to think or try suicide than their neurotypical peers. We've known for some time, the National Child Mortality Database report from October 21 told us that 16% of the young people that died by suicide in the period the year before had a diagnosed neurodevelopmental condition. The National Confidential Inquiry into Suicide and Safety and Mental Health 23 report told us for young people that under 18s were more likely to be female, living with parents, in education, and more often diagnosed with an anxiety disorder or autism, and to have been ill, that's mentally unwell, for less than 12 months. When you think the wait that our young people have to get mental health service now is things can go wrong very quickly. And in July last year, Learning from Deaths, the first report like this, children with a learning disability and autistic children, 35% of the autistic children who had died by suicide or self-inflicted injury. And they also took into consideration those that were suspected to be autistic or waiting for an assessment. And that's 56% of those children died by the same means. It is absolutely horrific. There is, if a person is 18 years plus, Learning from Lives and Deaths Register, autistic people were added to that. I think it's in 2022, and anybody can report the death of somebody with either a learning disability or an autistic person, or both. And it's so much better for more people to register than none, because we know that too few autistic adult deaths are being reported through the LEADER programme. There was also recently the Children's Commissioner report on waiting times for assessment and support for autism, ADHD, and other neurodevelopment conditions. The waiting times are one of the key things that can make a difference, and all of those above have recommendations. If you are, I would urge you to look at them. There are differing presentations, and autistic people have told us that when they are feeling suicidal, they may not show signs that people typically expect. And this is because they often present very differently. Daniel will be very matter of fact. They have differences in communicating and interacting with other people, find it difficult to communicate their thoughts. They might not want to talk about it, especially to you if you are not a trusted person. And they may find it difficult to identify and name their feelings, which is alexithymia and interoception. They may use different language, alternative ways to communicate. As I said, Daniel would say, "I want to go to sleep and not wake up," and be very matter of fact. He wouldn't look like he was in crisis, but he was. So remember that suicidal feelings and thoughts may look very different in an autistic person. They may even laugh. It's important not to make assumptions or judgments. We know that autistic people often find like daily life challenging. There's differences. We have differences in understanding social interaction, friendships, and relationships. Often feel socially isolated and misunderstood. We have sensory differences, either under or oversensitive to sounds, touch, textures, food, light, smells, temperature, lots of things. Challenges in feeling and recognizing and naming and regulating our emotions. Challenges with changes in routines such as school, home, work, holidays, seasons, and sleep. Autistic people often have real struggles with sleep, and we know that sleep deprivation can be a real impact. But if any autistic person tells you they are suicidal, you should believe them and do what you can to help, because autistic people make up approximately 1 to 2% of the population, but 11% of suicides. It's thought to be much, much higher with those who are suspected to be, as indicated by the data from our children and young people. But every suicide is a tragedy, but the statistics of the mortality rate for autistic people is a national crisis. We also need to consider autism and intersectionality, because autistic people are far more likely to identify with a diverse range of sexual orientations than non-autistic individuals. And we have research from people like the Trevor Project that are autistic LGBTQ plus youth face higher levels of mental health issues, and they're far more likely to have seriously considered suicide. But there is a real need to understand the diverse presentations of the neurodivergent community, gender identity, disability, ethnicity, and so much more, as so little consideration is often given to the intersectionality and challenges associated with multiple stigmatized identities. There is a new national strategy. I mean, it's not so new now. We're now entering 2025, but it does now have autistic people as a priority group. I've pushed for this through the various roles I have. I was able to present at the national conference in London to inform the strategy on the health inequalities of autistic people. I've also met with people with the all-party parliamentary group and spoke about autism and suicide prevention, as well as ministers. And I'm so pleased to see autistic people as that priority group. There are all these things that are in here, the links, and I'm happy to share my slides afterwards, come from the strategy, and they're all in there. The Autism Community Priorities Brief, that gives information. It's not a huge document, but it talks about the 10 priorities of things you can do right now, 10 things for the community to do, and other things. But do have a look at that. We've got the National Child Mortality Database report linked in there, as well as the new one now, hopefully will be a part of that. Undiagnosed or late diagnosed autism is acknowledged as a preventable risk factor, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in a little bit. And we looked at it looks at the other specific factors that further increase the risk of suicide among autistic people. That includes traumatic, painful life experiences, barriers to access and support, pressure to camouflage or mask, and feelings of not belonging, and huge difficulties in accessing appropriate mental health support because they have that autism diagnosis, are either awaiting an assessment or because of a lack of a reasonable adjustments to services. It states there is a need for health and care staff to have the right knowledge and skills to provide safe and compassionate care for autistic people. And it goes on to say about the opportunities for providing support for autistic children within the education system, and consider any tailored support that might be needed, ensuring that pupils and learners benefit from a safe, calm and supportive learning environment with early targeted support. I know from my national training that I've done that on a research on restrictive intervention, I think it was 91% of autistic children had some kind of emotional trauma through their restrictive practice in schools. And that includes seclusion, isolation, suspensions, illegal suspensions, and so on. And it just doesn't end for them. It's a real struggle. In February this year, I was invited to Westminster for the launch of the Autism and Suicide Prevention from Understanding to Action. They shared the findings of new research on autism and suicide prevention and brought together autistic people, advocates, campaigners, experts, frontline professionals, and policymakers. The outcomes of the discussion are to be shared and presented to the ministers and other key decision makers to help inform public policy and service provision. That latest research told us that people rated the most important, this is autistic people, rated the following as the most important factors in their suicidal thoughts: loneliness, feelings of worthlessness and failure, hopelessness, mental health. Those suicidal thoughts arose from experiences including lack of support, feelings of being abandoned by health services who could not help. One of the other things they said, that people would then not go back to mental health services if they've been rejected because of fear of that rejection again. And encountering services and professionals who are uncaring and antagonistic. And while I know that lots of people do a great job, that is the genuine feeling of people who were part of this research. But participants were often disbelieved when they sought help for suicidal thoughts, and I think that's down to that lack of understanding of the presentation that they may bring. I do sit on the Autism National Advisory Group, and we've been working on the priorities that we'd like to be added to the National Suicide Prevention Strategy Action Plan. It's currently being reviewed by the newer government because you can look yourself, there's only a couple of actions and they are totally insufficient, and we really hope to change that. So how can you help or support? Being kind costs nothing. Validate, have empathy, compassion, listen, and be mindful of your language. Low demand, think about the trauma, connect with these people, build up the relationships, remember the triangle of care, but always, always give hope. Reasonable adjustments, be trauma informed in your approach and language and appointments, the environment, because we know from research, which is linked down the bottom there, that the majority of autistic people have diagnosable levels of post-traumatic stress. You can have a read of Autisticas, supporting autistic children and young people through crisis. It covers lots of areas. It's a few years old now. There is a YouTube video delivered by autistic people themselves about it. It's 2020 it was produced, but it's useful for anyone really, because although it's designed for young people, there's so much of it in there would make relevant to adults too. But do training. Thank you for being here today to learn about this. But social care and health staff have to do the Oliver McGowan training on learning disabilities and autism. And most recently, and I'm one of these trainers for NHS staff, is the Anna Freud AT Autism Train the Trainer program. The Zero Suicide Alliance have an autism specific edition of their training that was brought about because somebody heard me talking about Daniel in Greater Manchester, and they funded that, and I was a part of the co-development and co-delivery of that. But there is so much other training out there, and even if it's not autism specific, it will help you in understanding how to maybe support or talk or listen to somebody who may be suicidal. I will also mention that I'm a co-deliverer of Recovery College, Understanding and Embracing Autism. It can be a great help for people understanding when they're first diagnosed or those on a waiting list. It's a really popular course, and there's morning ones. It's a 4-week course. There is a webinar to start off with, if you wish to do that first, and it's mornings, afternoons, or evenings. And I very often deliver the evening one with Declan, but it's I would say a real good course for people to do to just understand autism. But do raise your own awareness. Read, watch, talk, ask, value the voice of parents, carers and friends and lived experience, because those parents, carers and partners and families and friends are the experts in their loved ones, and listening costs nothing. There is some tools that are developed by Sarah Cassidy and her colleagues. There is the suicide behavioural questionnaires, scoring. It is designed to be filled in, but it also is really useful for clinicians or people to understand how to ask the questions of somebody who is in crisis, who's autistic, because it questions in a different way, but it will give you information. I mean, I've used it with people, and it has been shared within the trust too. There is the autistic depression assessment tool, which is useful for people to fill in if they were going to their GP. Um, and there is a guide for GPs about mental health and autism. And there is another document that doesn't come from there. That it's Lisa Morgan is an autistic person who has done lots of work on this, and her own lived experience. And autism crisis supports have the crisis supports for the community, autism community, and it has lots of information in there and resources. It is American, but it's still really relevant. I've spoken a bit already about the Zero Suicide Alliance, so I'm not going to dwell on this page, but again, it is really good to do. There is the Autism Suicide Prevention Training that I now co-deliver with nationally with Making Families Count and Autism Oxford. It's two-part training and provides you with lots of information. It is autism specific. We developed it for Surrey County Council after they had a prevention of future deaths notices that said they needed to train their workforce. We're still continuing with Surrey, but we have also launched nationally last year. It was launched just around our anniversary of losing Daniel, and so anybody can do that, and the links are there. It is a cost to that though. The Zero Suicide Alliance is free. There is also the National Autism Trainer, which I've spoken about, but there is information on the slides in here. But I do like to kind of finish or almost finish on a positive, because it doesn't have to be this way. My eldest, Matthew, my youngest, Elliot, and Jamie there in the middle is my second youngest. Matthew and Elliot, I fought really hard for them. I got them out to a specialist independent school where they absolutely flourished. Matthew always wanted to be a racing driver. That was kind of put down when he was in mainstream. No, he's never going to be a racing driver. No, we need to put him in another direction kind of thing. Well, he isn't. He isn't a racing driver, but he actually is an incredible mechanic. I think it's much more than that. Works for Hybrid Tune, or works with Sam Hybrid Tune, his friend who he was at school with, opened up their own little business, which has grown and grown and bought into by Renvale, a international company. He's done work for McLaren. He kind of reformats and sets up cars to be at their top performance, and he's sitting there on the Roland Road at their workshop in Jim Clark's Formula One car. He's not just living his dream, he's absolutely riding it. He's doing his hobby. And Elliot there on the right hand side, that's him at Buckingham Palace, and Prince Philip is there just about to speak to him, asking what he did for his challenge. And Elliot was the first child at his school to achieve the Gold Duke of Edinburgh Award, and he's now works nationally with that. He's an expedition assessor, supervisor, and also works in Wales now as an outdoor activity instructor, teaching the young people how to explore caves or be up a mountain. I mean, he's not happy unless he's somewhere either wet, cold, or really challenging himself. And Jamie in the middle there, with the medal around his neck, he really missed his brother. Daniel was very close to Jamie, and Sam is standing next to him. That's Sam, Daniel's best friend. Jamie really thrived, got his own business, but he gave that up just over a year ago now, I think. And Sam and Jamie both work for an alternative education provider called Push Forward in Suffolk, giving their skills and teaching young people who aren't able to attend school for whatever reason. And they're both passionate about their jobs. So my final slide, my promise, my hope, and your action. Daniel sent a message to a friend just before we lost him, and that friend shared it with me, and this is a part of it. I enjoy helping. Seeing people achieve is what what they can is what I like. I've been at the bottom and it's not nice. So keeping people on the right track and pushing them to where they want to be is all I want to do, even if it's not in the gym. Helping people be the best version of themselves is what I will help do. And in return, it helps me be the best version of me I can be. I'm here today because of Daniel and my promise for change for all our children, all our young people, adults, their families and friends. Because there have been too many inquests of autistic people with narratives of missed opportunities, multiple failures in care and treatment, and reasonable adjustments. And you can help me make that change, because I believe that by all working together, we can do this and we will make change. And I do this every time, ask for your pledges for creating hope through your actions. That's the previous World Suicide Prevention Day theme. But I still carry it on because I think it's so important. And to go out there and be the best version of you that you can be, because suicide prevention is everybody's business. And I believe that we can all make a difference. Thank you.
Sue, thank you so much for sharing both your personal experience and your insight. Thank you very much indeed.
And I'm sorry, I might have gone over a little bit.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. I'm going to hand over now to Rob and hopefully Beth to continue. So thank you.
Thank you, Graham, and so very moving. It's quite an act to follow. I feel emotional. I've got tears in my eyes. It's beautiful, and I think really helps us connect to the fact that everybody here wants to be able to support and help others, particularly in their time of need. And a fear and anxiety about getting it wrong often is what prevents people from doing enough. So I'm going to share my screen and make sure I share the sound, because we've got a little sound clip, a little sound bite, and we've got to get through quite a lot in wait a minute, I just think I need to stop sharing for a second in the short period of time we've got. So I'll stop talking and just try and concentrate on getting this right. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm Beth Mosley. I'm work for NSFT, and I work within children's mental health. And Robbie?
Hi, I am Rob, or Robbie Piers, and I work for the Youth Autism Diagnostic Team, also at NSFT.
We're going to share the presentation. We've got a mixture, so Robbie, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Beth. So, yeah, as Beth said, there's so much to cover, so we're really going to be racing through. But we will share our slides with Graham, who said in the chat that he'll send it to everyone afterwards and also put it up on the website. So building on from what Sue has said, we thought that maybe a key takeaway message from today is that signs of autism. So our presentation is about thinking about when you're assessing someone for risk of taking their own life. And we thought that maybe a key takeaway message is that signs of autism, when either someone's autistic, they've got a diagnosis, or there are signs that they may be autistic, that's a red flag to kind of stop and think, hold on, maybe my usual tools, my usual assumptions, the normal models I use might not be accurate here. And the reasons for that, I won't dwell on. They kind of go back to what Sue was talking about, where someone who's neurodiverse, there's sort of lots of differences in terms of their motivations, the factors contributing to sort of why they've ended up in a state of crisis. Next slide, please, Beth. Thanks. The way that they might be able to communicate and engage with you, how they might express their distress, sort of their relationship within their family or social networks. There might be differences there. And sort of just their life experiences and ability, sort of like the work, how they engage with work, education, social activities, that might be different or complicated. So there's lots of reasons to kind of stop and think, hold on, maybe I've got to be thinking differently and doing something differently here.
And really briefly, but just to highlight that this is an emerging new area of research in terms of understanding neurodivergent differences and moving away from looking at neurodivergence as a deficit. So if we can think about these 7 different areas where there may be variation, this can be helpful in terms of thinking about what we might need to do differently, or how we need to perhaps adapt our, not just our thinking, but what we're saying, and what we're doing with regard to the environment that that person might be in, to try and make it more appropriate to offer the most support possible. And this is a new paradigm. It's really, really new, a new way of understanding neurodivergence. And I just thought I'd put it in the slide with the link. So if anybody's interested in understanding neurodivergence differently, they've got that opportunity. So I think one of the things that is really important to acknowledge is this idea of double empathy. And the challenge for many people is that often autistic people are viewed as not having empathy. But we know that there's an alternative emerging view in autism research, which is challenging this notion of empathy deficit altogether. And it's talking instead about something called double empathy. And the idea is really when people from very different worldviews interact, they struggle to empathize with each other. So really the challenge is about reciprocity and communication, rather than there being a deficit in one person. And I think the challenge quite often for an autistic person is that when there's difficulties perhaps with understanding that autistic person, it's seen as a deficit in that person, rather than thinking that from the neurotypical person perhaps is the one who hasn't got the that ability to recognize and understand those differences. So a big challenge for people, for neurodivergent individuals, is if you're living in a neurotypical world, you're constantly having to struggle with others not understanding you, whilst also you struggling to perhaps naturally adapt to that neurotypical way of operating within the world. And this leads to masking, which is when a person might learn to consciously or subconsciously hide or suppress some of their behaviors to fit in with non-autistic people's expectations. And this is a particularly common difficulty with autistic people, but also particularly women and girls. And this is really, really exhausting. So I think that in terms of thinking about double empathy, if you imagine being dropped into a foreign country with a different language and a different culture, and expected to be able to understand what's going on around in the world around you, and trying to constantly catch up, is absolutely exhausting. So there's a real challenge around this kind of issue, because it can absolutely lead to burnout, and that feeling of being unsupported, not understood, again leads to those feelings of isolation and loneliness, which Sue referenced in her presentation. And another important key consideration is around processing everyday sensory information can be difficult for autistic people. So any of their senses may be oversensitive or undersensitive, or both at different times. And this can really affect how that person feels and acts, and can have a really profound impact on a person's life. And sometimes that person may behave in the way you wouldn't immediately link to sensory differences. And so one of the things to really think about is, how do you create some environmental adaptations to support that person's sensory needs? It could be something about just turning the lighting down. It could be really bright lighting, could be a problem. I listened to a psychiatrist present in December at a conference, and he said that he turned the lights off and they completed the assessment in the dark, and that enabled that person to be able to really communicate with the other person. So it's really trying to understand what those things that you might take for granted, how they might be having an impact on sensory overload, and understanding that person's preferences, and asking them explicitly if there is too much noise, and a really loud ticking clock, which you might not even notice, potentially could be something that could be having an impact on that person's ability to be able to communicate with you. There's a really great good practice guide which provides some really helpful guidelines on helping think about how environments can be adapted appropriately to support people. So the key top tips we're going to cover are going to essentially help you think about these elements, but in a really practical way. And again, we haven't got much time, but essentially changing the environment to make sure it isn't overwhelming, using simple, plain language, giving time for autistic people to process information and answer questions, ask them if they'd like someone close to them to be involved in sessions, support them to be able to label their own feelings and emotions, try to incorporate autistic people's interests if that will help them, and note down what you've covered and share this with the autistic person. So they're the key top tips. And what we're going to think about now is how do you practically relate that to some of those questions that you might be asking in the moment. So I'm going to hand you over to Robbie now.
Thanks, Beth. So coming back to our key takeaway message, autism, signs of autism is a red flag. Let me stop and do things differently. The idea behind that is not to say it's not to say that you can't do stuff, not to sort of paralyze you in any way, but what we're hoping by thinking through these typical questions that you might, or this typical way of working through a risk assessment, is to help you think sort of, how can I work differently? So in a risk assessment, typically as a professional, what you might be thinking about is what's going on in this person's internal world. And you might ask that, you might sort of try to learn about that by asking the question, so tell me, how are you feeling? How are you doing today? How are things going? Something about that. Next slide, please, Beth. And where that can go wrong, so we had a thought about that, is it's an open-ended question that could have an ambiguous meaning. So how am I feeling? Did you mean, how did I feel when I woke up at breakfast? How am I feeling right now? How was I feeling 5 minutes ago? It could be that the person you're talking to they're just overwhelmed with everything that's going on for them, and might take them a long time to sort of process all those different meanings, and then try and work out, there's that double empathy problem, try and work out what is it that you're actually asking or wanting to know. And they'd have to sort of cycle through all those different meanings and then basically almost guess, oh, are you wanting to know how I feel right now? That kind of thing, which might not be the answer you asking. Yeah, that might not be what you're hoping for. When you're asking that question, you want to get a sense of, are things really bad? Are things okay? Are things a bit better than that? And then you might get this very specific answer about how they were how they're feeling at a very specific moment in time. Yeah, that comes back to that double empathy problem again, not understanding why you're asking this question. So the whole context behind the assessment, you might be speaking to them because someone's made a crisis call, and then you're coming in, and for that seems obvious to you. You're a professional, you're coming to help them, but that might not be obvious to the person you're speaking to. So then sort of like, oh, well, you've come to help me, but why are you asking about how I'm feeling? And then again, there's a lot to work through and think about. Another way it could go wrong is this thing called alexithymia, which is a way of describing what is common in many autistic people, which is having difficulty identifying and describing one's emotions. And a good way of thinking about that is, it's first of all a difficulty having an awareness of an emotional experience, then being able to sort of express that or show that, and then being able to communicate that to someone else. So this can kind of, the autistic person or possibly autistic person who's in crisis might not realize what's going on, or they might think they're doing okay, but actually there's this emotion that is confusing for them, or they're not aware of, or they haven't been able to process yet. And then being able to get to the stage of being able to communicate that to you and share that with you, or share that with someone so they can seek support. That might have gone wrong. Yeah. And sort of the last point on this is about emotional dysregulation. Emotions feeling all over the place, not being able to manage emotions is again very common in autistic people. And what that means is that they might be getting overwhelmed much more often than someone else in a similar situation. And there often talks about people often talk about shutdowns or sort of meltdowns, and that's again about just coping with this sort of being overwhelmed, and then being able to access that internal world, that estate, and describe it to you in that moment when you're trying to assess it. It could be going wrong in that way too. Next slide, please, Beth. So what can you do to sort of this is not about, it's not so, what we are thinking is it's not so much about not asking questions about the internal world, but when you see that the person you're talking to is maybe not sure how to answer that, or they're taking a long time to answer, or you get an answer that seems confusing, it's to think about your approach. So it might be that you have to go right back to the beginning and kind of explain perhaps what you didn't do so clearly, which is this is who I am, this is why I've come to see you, this is the reason why I'm going to be asking you questions. I'm going to be asking questions about how you're feeling because I'm wanting to know this. I want to know that so it can help us make plans to keep you safe or know what to do to help you best, that kind of thing. So just breaking down things a lot more. Sort of giving the person, I think a lot comes to permission, saying it's all right to be yourself, and it's all right to, you don't need to mask, you don't need to try and act in the way that you think I want you to act, but just to kind of, tell me if I'm getting it wrong, tell me if something's not clear. It might be that there's sensory things going on, so perhaps, or, it's very intense when you having to make eye contact with someone when that's not your preference. So perhaps sitting next to the person. Often what helps is writing things down or drawing things out or having a visual tool. All these things can kind of help take the pressure off. And then perhaps instead of that open-ended question, maybe breaking it down into easier to answer questions that you then build up. Next slide, please, Beth. And here's a quote from an autistic person to sort of just bring this home. So, how are you feeling today? I don't know. I'm not trying to be difficult or uncommunicative. I genuinely don't know how I feel. I can probably narrow it down to bad or good, maybe with a body part. I feel bad and my ear feels weird. I feel bad and my stomach feels like it has a rock in it. But I can't work out what emotional descriptor this feeling might link to, how someone else might describe this feeling. At best, I can work it out logically. I feel bad, and I started feeling bad after reading an email about a work project. So I guess I'm stressed. Or am I anxious? So I think that quote just shows some of the confusion inherent in just working out how I'm feeling and then communicating that to someone else. Next slide, please. Thanks. So then we thought that, oh, sorry, I'm taking way too much time. I'm going to race through this next bit. The next thing that you might be thinking about when you're assessing someone for risk is what's their functioning like? And you might ask that with questions like, do you work? Are you at school? How's that going? How are things there? And why this can go wrong is because autistic people mask that interoceptive awareness. They may not be aware that things are difficult. When autistic people prefer things to be the same, many autistic people do. So it might be that even though they're struggling, stopping doing what they normally do will just add to their stress rather than make it worse. So next slide, please, Beth. The key kind of message here is to just question your assumptions about what good functioning looks like or what normal functioning looks like. So it might be that the person's in crisis, even though you're not seeing those typical signs, and they've stopped work, they're just sleeping all day, things like that. And hand over to you, Beth, for the last bit.
And I guess, yeah, just that idea that actually sticking to a routine might be a sign of stress rather than coping. So it's, again, just like Robbie's saying, just moving away from those assumptions that you might naturally make. So in terms of thinking about the questions around, do you have suicidal thoughts? Have you made any plans? Again, these same challenges come into play when asking these kind of questions that you might ask in a very standardized way for neurotypical patients or people that you might be working with, but actually those questions may not actually reveal the information that's going to be helpful in understanding where that person is at and what help and support they need, very much as Sue described earlier on. So I have a really brief clip here, but I just think we're not going to have time. So it's an audio clip from an autistic young person who has periods of crisis, and they have it's quite a long clip. I was going to play a couple of minutes from it, but these slides are going to be shared with you. So I'd really recommend listening to that person's experience, because they describe what crisis looks like for them and how it's often very much misunderstood by others. And then they give some advice about how you as another person can understand when they're in crisis and what they need to do. But it is about a 7-minute clip, but it's there for people in the slide deck. So I guess the key things, the key take-home messages, I'm aware we're really short on time, is exactly what Sue said. Believe the autistic person who tells you that they feel suicide, even if that information comes in a different or unexpected manner. Do not rely on standardized assessment tools, because they may not identify those risks. And as Sue has suggested, there are some useful tools that are adapted for autism. I think this is a really important point around making sure that the questions that you've asked have been interpreted correctly, and that the information that's been given back is that you've understood it correctly. Again, going back to the interoception and alexithymia, a person with autism may not present as having objective plans or being objectively depressed. So asking the question, do you have any plans to end your life? The patient might reply no. And this is actually a real case example where a person on a psychiatric ward was asked if they had plans to end their life. They said no. They did attempt to end their life following the risk assessment. And when asked why, they said no. They replied, it was not a plan. It was something I intended to do. And again, that person did not appear objectively depressed, because they didn't have the usual markers for depression, because they couldn't describe how they were feeling inside. So again, going back to that notion that the things that we might typically do are actually really unhelpful, because they're not understanding what's going on inside of that autistic person's internal world. And again, trying to understand what normal might look like for that person and how they may be feeling, thinking, and behaving, which is different from their normal. So again, if somebody's struggling to think about their warning signs that they're struggling, focusing on more concrete things. For example, what does a normal day look like for you when things are going well? How much do you usually sleep? And then does this change when things are more difficult? And again, it's really developing that rapport, showing an interest and understanding what's important to that person in front of you, that idea of curiosity and care and hope that Sue talked to, and understanding that quite often a special interest and being able to use that special interest can really help engage that person, help them relax more, and then feel more able to engage in trusting and speaking with you. There's some really clear examples of well-defined and specific questions when assessing intent. And so it's example, instead of thinking how often do you think of suicide or how likely you to harm yourself in the future, using questions like, how many times have you thought of harming yourself today? How long did you think about this when you had these thoughts? Do you think these thoughts will be less or more over the next week? What do you do when you have these thoughts? And again, that very much fits with the assessment that Sue gave a link to earlier in her presentation. And this is really interesting, but Newcastle University have just done a piece of research on autism adapted safety plans, and I'm going to be taking this to the NSFT safety planning team to think about creating and ensuring that people have this pack that they can use to support them with adapting their safety plans appropriately. This is being researched and shown to be a really helpful tool. It's essentially what the research has shown is that the key things that you need to consider when developing a safety plan or assessing risk is developing trust, relying on the support from other trusted people in that person's network to help as well, acknowledging it will take more time, it will require clearer language, it will require more time with doing each section of the safety plan for processing and providing opportunities to build rapport, and that the person may need more support to identify those warning signs and the helpful support strategies. And I've put the links in here, but the whole pack is available for people to use. And within that pack, they've also provided really clear questions that you can ask. They've got the whole document, and at the back they've got these additional resources that you can use, so visual resources that can potentially be helpful for helping autistic people to name some of their feelings inside. And again, some of these things you can draw on a piece of paper. You don't actually necessarily need that thing there in front of you, so it might be drawing a line and rating things from 0 to 10, or drawing a body map and asking a person to point to or color in where their difficulties are in their body can help with providing that more concrete way of connecting to what might be going on for that individual. There's loads more slides of additional tips, but we just today have not had enough time. That's us finished for now.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Robbie. Thanks very much for that. I'm aware that we are close to the 1 hour, which we tried to keep to, but I'm just going to hand over now to Ash, who is from Darlington. So his project was funded by the National Suicide Prevention Fund. So Ash, can you hand over to you now.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for the invite. It's been great to see others' presentations. So I'm Ashley Wilson, and I am the head of quality and service development for an organisation based in the Northeast. SJOG is an organisation with many different arms. We provide services to individuals with autism, to those affected by modern day slavery, older communities, learning disabilities, and also provide supported housing. So as Graham mentioned there, we were lucky enough in December of 2023 to receive part of the Suicide Prevention Grant Fund, which was launched in August of that year. What we did with that is we looked to design a project that would help the prevention of suicidality for autistic people, and we came up with the idea of Here to Help. One of the strands that I just want to talk to you about Here to Help today, very quickly, as I appreciate time, is that we engaged with subject matter experts, including autistic people, their families, essential practitioners from the Northeast, and also with academics to design a web platform. This web platform was user tested by autistic people, and autistic people continue to sit on our steering groups as well. So I'll share my screen and just go through a little bit of the website that we do have. But just to note, everything on the website is completely free. Everything is able to be downloaded, and it is consistently updated. So if you do feel like this might help somebody in your area, although we are based in the Northeast, please feel free to share this link too. Can I just check that that's come through for everybody, Graham?
Yeah, that's good.
Brilliant. So Here to Help, like I say, this was a project that was designed to tackle suicide prevention, suicide awareness for autistic people in lots of different ways. So alongside various events that we've delivered in the Northeast, alongside training, this was part of the project that has been the most successful. We've actually supported over 900 autistic individuals directly, and we've had website engagement of over 40,000 individuals. So when you arrive at the website, one of the first things that we looked at with our user feedback group was how the website looked. How did we ensure that that information was accessible for autistic people, but also accessible for individuals supporting them, including family members, siblings, and also professionals as well. So we kept the website extremely simple. We added the option, again, to look at sensory processing difficulties. We added the option for the screen to be muted so that we could turn off that direct colour. And we also ensured that what information we had on here was also in an accessible format for everybody there. So the website itself is, if you click on any of these tabs, it will bring up a second page. So again, really simple tool, really simple tip for people who potentially need that crisis support at that point in time. And again, each of these areas, so I need help for myself, was generally targeted at autistic individuals. And what we created within that was a range of tools. So we have things like alert cards, things like calendar templates, some of the visual aids that were used in the previous presentation are also on here, things like the emotional wheel, the temperature gauge for emotional recognition. And we also provided things such as easy read documents that could be downloaded or read online. So again, these were designed with our steering groups, which included autistic individuals and family members, and are totally free. We also looked at designing toolkits. So what we did with that is we wanted a range of toolkits. So we have family toolkits, we have employer toolkits, toolkits for yourself, understanding your normal, for example, and we also provided local information toolkits as well. Everything can be accessed from the burger menu down the left-hand side, which was a point of discussion through lots of the user testing because we weren't sure whether or not it needed to be on the left or the right, and we were quickly corrected by our autistic steering group that it needed to be on the left. So there's lots of different things that you can access. We've uploaded podcasts, we've uploaded, like I say, fact sheets. We've got a couple of examples of the training that we've offered out to professionals and to volunteer groups. So yeah, if anybody would like to have a look at the website, I'll pop the link into the chat. And I've also sent this to Graham if anybody wants to see it. But equally, if anybody wants to know any more about Here to Help, please pop me an email. We have been focused in the Northeast up until March 31st this year, because that is when the Department of Health and Social Care grant funding ceased for us. But we have been lucky enough to secure funding for a further 2 years. So we are looking to hopefully scale the project a little bit wider and reach out further than the Northeast. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, but thank you very much, Graham, for the opportunity to present Here to Help, and it's been lovely listening to the other presentations as well. It's great to see so many people with a common goal.
Excellent, thank you, Ashley. And sorry, it was a bit rushed at the end. And yeah, a big thank you to all our speakers. I'm not going to do a big sort of roundup, but just want to mention that the next webinar is going to be on 22nd of May, 11 AM, and it's on domestic abuse. So there'll be a link to sign up sent around with the slides for this. This webinar will be available to watch as a download on catch up if you want to frame it. So I would encourage you to use this as perhaps a resource for your team meeting, but we are very much keen just to get people talking about suicide prevention, to make suicide everyone's business. So thank you very much for attending this morning.
Graham,
and most importantly, yeah, go Beth, go.
We've got an amazing NDD parent workshop program which is accessible to everybody through the local author website, and so we really recommend that to all the families you meet. and we're hopefully going to be supporting providing that training in all schools across Suffolk. It's being provided in schools across Essex at the moment, so it's really about giving that better understanding to everyone. But that's a free accessible resource. Maybe Graham, you can send, I'll put that on the slide deck.
Yeah. Fantastic, thanks Beth, and yeah, thanks very much for our speakers, and most importantly, yeah, look after yourself, stay safe and help others to stay safe. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you.